Where monsters speak. A man of authority, with a heart black as coal, preying on children, taking their soul. All Jews reign, a terror untold. In the guise of guidance, his evil control. Hid in plain sight, the darkness prevails. As victims cried out, the justice prevailed. In the end, as the truth emerged, the begins to send. So here's to the survivors who found their voice in the face of evil. Hello. Hold on a second. I want to remove this. I tried to go back to see where I left off. And I saw a few edits I had to make. Please keep in mind that I understand that it's public information, but I choose to shield the victims as much as I can. I get, hi, Hamma. I understand that it is public information, right? Just it's my own personal preference. I don't shield staff, right? Because fuck them. The guy that is in this photo is Jan Charipko. He is the staff member that was deposed regarding one of the sexual assault cases. And I think, well, I know I have trigger warning, just there's a lot of mentions of child abuse. If you didn't see the original one that I did, that I did do, I had to leave. I had something I had to take care of. But Jan Charipko died at the beginning of June, right? So now he could rot in hell for all I care. But it's interesting. This specific deposition is interesting to me because one of the attorneys was a student, right? So they have little wiggle room as far as what they, you can't lie to a student, right? They could lie to themselves. They could justify their behavior to themselves and amongst each other, but they can't lie with the student there, right? Which is interesting because he absolutely does lie. So I tried to set it to where we left off, which is around page 90 of the deposition. It's listed at like 250 something pages. However, the rest of it is like a table of contents. There's a lot of that does take up a lot of pages. Hello, Florida Gray Lady. So just bear with me a second because I haven't quite become a master at this. Hold on. And I did mean to get to it sooner. I've just, real life has been super busy, in my world. So let me do this. Hold on. This is page 90. That's where we left off. Hold on. Let me use another device. And it's weird to me how all staff says like the same thing, right? Like they all in their heads, right? They were helping, right? They all kind of have the same narrative. It's kind of strange to me. But again, like I do try to keep the victims' names. There's multiple. There is a lot of redacted information in here that I did not redact. The courts redacted. So it's strange to me how whenever they're presented with like a clear question, right, they kind of skirt around it. It's weird to me. Now, Jan worked there. I know it was addressed in the beginning, but just a little bit of a recap. Jan worked there when I was there in 96. He was part-time. He only came in on like Thursdays and he did creative writing. He is a published author as well. So there's that, right? But we see him asked, was students ever required to carry censor boxes punishment? To do what? You heard him. You heard them, right? And you know the answer, but weird. And also a recurring thing in here is he says, well, that was permitted in other families, but not mine, right? He does that a lot, actually. But let's get into it, right? In other families, he says, that is not something that we ever employed. Are you familiar with the term blackout as a punishment? Yes. Oh, Hannah, did you relay my contact information to the student that you had on yesterday? I don't know if you're still here. Blackout was you were not going to have any contact with your family or outside your family. So I know I've explained this before. I don't know who's been here, who hasn't. Blackout was something that you could be put on with, like in my case, I was put on blackout for a period of time. Anybody that was at the school 6 months or less, because I was considered negative, right? That meant that anybody at the school that was there for less than 6 months, I could not have any communication with. I was also on blackout with boys. Family blackout was something that you get when you're first there, right? And then I was put on family blackout when I ran away, right? Because they want to try to get some cushioning there. I also noticed in the Hi My Crazy Life in the interview that Hama did last night, the student talked about being on blackout with his family. So if they thought that you had a really toxic bond with like your family or something along those lines, they would institute a period of blackout, right? Trying to break that relationship, right? So now this makes me a little angry, right? Or people outside your family or outside the family. Yes. How was that enforced? Right. Jan says you couldn't have a phone call. I think that the standard operating procedure was that when a student first came to the school and the parents were quite aware of this and they agreed to it, that the first 30 days there would be no contact between the student and the parents. And then after they would get that first phone call, then there would be a weekly phone call set up from that time forward, if I'm not mistaken, right? So I've heard students say that they were on family blackout for 3 months or 90 days after getting there. When I was there, it was only 30 days, right? And in that 30 days is when you're writing that dishonesty list that staff keeps telling you, I know you're missing something. So a lot of students, like, we lied on them, right? We didn't know at the time that staff used that as manipulation to the parents with, oh, your kid needs this so bad, it's going to be life-saving, right? So it's like this big thing of manipulation. A student on blackout, would they be prohibited from speaking to their family? And Jan says that is correct. A student on blackout, would they be forbidden to speak with any of the other students? And he says that could be possible. Now, this is quite annoying. It could be a month or longer with the family. That is for the phone calls. The question says, how about when you say the family, you mean the FFS school family, correct? And he says, yes, I'm sorry. Question again, that a student could be on a blackout and not allowed to speak to that family foundation school. FFS is a family foundation school abbreviation, family members for as much as a month. Is that correct? And Jan says, no, that would be pretty long. I would not say that to be the case. All right. That's a flat out lie. Hi, guys. That's a flat out lie. I was on blackout with boys for 18 months. I was there 3 days. I was put on blackout with boys and I stayed on blackout with boys until the day that I walked away from that place. Okay. Blackout with 6 months or younger, I was probably on for a solid 6 months. So I don't know that, like, it's crazy how they lie. So then he's asked, what was the longest you ever saw that a student was prohibited from speaking to other residents? They also had personal blackout, right? Let's say that you had negative contracts with a specific student. Negative contracts meaning like you guys plan to run away, or let's say you were talking about one of the girls or one of the boys, whatever. You'd be put on personal blackout with that student, meaning you could have no communication with that student, right? And he says maybe a week. That is my family. I don't know about other families. Okay. So this seems to be a recurring thing in this deposition. Is he shirks responsibility, right? Yeah, that didn't happen in my family. Maybe the other ones, but not in mine. Strange. What is the longest that students would be prohibited from speaking to their family of origin? And Jan says that could be about a month. It could be 2 to 3 or 4 phone calls. Weird. How were the phone calls made when they got to speak to their family? Was it a telephone or something else? So when I was at the school, we had like a telephone room. The student that was making the call would sit there. There would be a senior member sitting there on the other line listening. I don't know how that changed when the new school was built, but I only can discuss what I went by, right? And he said it was a telephone at FFS. The first phone call was done with a family leader and what was called a sponsor and junior sponsor, and they made a phone call home and talked to the parents. That wasn't the case for me. It was just there was a senior member that would be on phone duty, each night of the week. It rotated a lot. And that's who would be listening to your phone call. What is a sponsor and junior sponsor? Jan says a sponsor was somebody who was a staff member who was assigned that particular person to try and work one-on-one. Junior sponsor was a senior student who was assigned to that particular student to work with him or her one-on-one. That's pretty accurate. The sponsor is different than a family leader. Is that correct? And he says correct. The family leader could be a sponsor as well. That's true. Were you a sponsor for any students? Yes. If you could help us understand the difference between what a family leader did as opposed to what the sponsor did. There's really not a difference, but there were family leaders who could be sponsees, right? So Jan says the sponsor was going to talk to the person and meet with them one-on-one and try to work with them in terms of what their personal problems were. The family leader was going to be the receptor to all the problems that were occurring in the family and sometimes talk to the student one-on-one, sometimes deal with the issue in family settings, sometimes talk to administration. Now, a family leader would ultimately be responsible for all sanctions, punishments, all of that stuff. They would also be the ones responsible to give report to administration about the things that occurred at that table topic, meal, whatever. What, if anything, would happen to a resident who spoke with a person who was on blackout? And Jan asks, in other words, a person who was on blackout with other students? Because, I could see how that was confusing, right? Yes, let me try again. So if a student is on blackout and another student speaks to that student who is on blackout, what, if anything, would happen to the student who is not on blackout but spoke to the student who was on blackout? And Jan says they would be confronted about what it is they had done. What the consequence of that might be would vary from student to student. So the question is, were there potential disciplinary actions taken against the student who spoke to the student who was on blackout? And he said there could be. And who would decide that? The family leader. You following here? How would the family leader learn that a student had spoken to another student who was on blackout? And Jan says, well, 1, they might see it firsthand. 2, another student might tell them about it. Or 3, the student who broke the blackout may come forward and tell them about it. And that would usually end with the table topic. They asked, would other students be expected to report a blackout violation? Yes, absolutely. 9 times out of 10, if I was brought up for a blackout violation, it was a student that was bringing me up to the table topic. How do students know that they are expected to report blackout violations? And Jen says, well, the blackout would have been created probably at a table topic, and the students would have known about it. And so there was an agreement that the agreement was you are going to follow these rules. So if somebody was not following the rules, well, you had an obligation to say he or she is not following the rules. It's weird how that works. Had the students been specifically instructed to report blackout violations to family leaders? Specifically instructed? Yes. No, I would not say so. Question asked, how did students know that they were expected to report blackout violations? I notice he does this a lot, as well. And in his answers, he says it was simply part of the experience of being at the family. So he keeps trying to, he keeps like putting responsibility other places when ultimately he was a family leader and a mandated reporter, right? How did other students know that the Blackout student was on Blackout? The answer is the person who was on Blackout it was incumbent upon them to say, I am on Blackout. Or if there was another student nearby who knew, or staff who knew that they were on Blackout, they would simply say he or she is on Blackout. They ask if a student who was on Blackout did not say that they were on Blackout, would they be subject to additional sanctions? And Jan says, perhaps, but not necessarily. I think it would simply have been a reminder, hey, you're on Blackout, remember? I think that it's a little bit more forceful than that, but anyway. Was there any concern with the effect of a student who was on Blackout? Was there any concern about the effect that would have on the student on Blackout? Right? Now, I also noticed this a lot in the reports of the reports that were from the investigations. There was a lot of this, right? Any of your policies and procedures reviewed by psychiatrists, and here we are, right? That would absolutely have an effect on the student that was on Blackout. Like for me, as far as Blackout with boys, like that had a lasting effect on my relationships with men my entire life, right? And Jan says the idea was you need to comport yourself in a better behavior. So the concern wasn't that this could be harmful to the person. It was rather, if you want to be a part of a community, that you have to follow the rules. And you have to remember that the whole reason they were sent to the family school by somebody was that they were not following the rules. Sort of like spoiled rich kids, right? Weird. So then they asked, did you ever have a concern that a student who was placed on Blackout was humiliated by that experience? And Jen says, no, that didn't cross my mind. I did not think they were humiliated by it. Here we go, right? Good question. To your knowledge, did a psychologist or psychiatrist ever review the Blackout process to determine whether it would have any kind of negative impact on the student, right? Lawyer says, objection to the form. Jan says, I have no idea. What kind of behavior would merit a Blackout? There was a million things that you could be put on Blackout for. But Jan says a person who was, if there was a discovery that the person was, and this is probably the primary one actually, that he or she was planning to run away, then they would be placed on Blackout. That's facts, right? If they knew that you were about to run away with, let's say, Johnny, Chris, and Jim, right? You'd all be placed on Blackout, personal Blackout with each other, meaning you couldn't communicate, blah, blah, blah. How many students ran away in 2013? He said, I have no idea. Question asked, what is your sense of how often a student would run away? Jan says, given the population of people who were troubled when they came there, I would probably say that it was in the overall maybe 10% range, and there were some students who ran away more than once. So are you saying 10% a year? And he said that would be this is a very, very rough estimate, but yes, 10% a year, 10% over the years that I was there. They asked him, when you took away a student's shoes, did you take away their socks also? And he says he doesn't recall ever doing that in their family. That was standard operating procedure. If you ran away, if you were thinking of run away, most times if you were even in the corner, you had no shoes, right? So it's weird to me that that's what he says. He said, do you recall ever taking away a student's shoes? And he says, student shoes? The answer would be yes, Jan. Oh, it's crazy. So you take away their shoes, but not their socks, and you don't know what other families did? And Jan says, correct. Other than taking away a resident's shoes, were there anything else that FFS did to prevent runaways? Jan says, well, we certainly would alert their biological family, their parents or caregivers. I can't think of anyone else. Now, where's that guy that you interviewed, Hammer? Next question. Are you familiar with students being wrapped up as a form of discipline? Strange. Jan's answer, that happened before I was a full-time employee there. That's weird. I find it super weird that you don't have to look very far to see that there are ways to corroborate the stories that we tell, right? There are ways to back up the things that we say, and yet somebody sits on a public platform and states they don't believe that happened. That's weird. In your tenure as a full-time employee, were you aware of any students ever being wrapped up? He says, not that I recall. That's bullshit, Jan. That's a flat out lie, Jan, because if a student was in isolation, the teacher would be advised that the student was in isolation, okay? Question, can you describe what wrapped up means? This is Jan's answer, okay? It was you would take blankets and wrap the person up and use duct tape to secure the blanket. It's weird how somebody would say that they don't think that happened, but a staff member admits to it. I find that weird, right? My understanding with that was that this was an acceptable practice according to New York State rules at the time. Come again? That was never an acceptable practice in any state for any reason, right? To your knowledge, did the rules ever change in the state? Yes, I have no idea. I suspect they did, but I don't know. How did you come to understand that it was permissible under New York State laws, rules, and regulations? Jan says administration had said that it was. The Orteros? Correct. But I would qualify that by saying that the administration was involved with New York State educational systems for private schools. And so they were getting this information from that organization, and the head of that organization visited the school more than once, and this was a state-run agency. Are you talking about the man that stepped down the day after the 2010 investigation, Jan? Is that who you're talking about? Interesting. They ask him, I want to go back. I missed a question. You used the word confronted. Can you describe what you meant when you used that word? Jan says, sure. Somebody punched out a window. I would certainly say fairly loudly, why did you do that? That is a confrontation. He says, what would you do in confronting the student? And Jan says, it depends on the situation. Was that term confronted a term that had specific meaning at Family Foundation School? Jan says specific meaning. I think that the idea was that if somebody's behavior was inappropriate, you were going to say something to them. Was that a term that was used at FFS? Yes, sure. Other than saying to a student, why did you do that? Was there any other aspect to the term confronted? Jan says there could be, depending on the situation. You know exactly what he's asking you, Jan Charipko. What was your understanding of the use of that term? Jan says, in my mind, it was to simply do what the word means, which is to speak to the person and say, why did you behave that way? Ooh, I like this one. Were there any other physical restraint procedures that were used at FFS while you were there? Jan says, yes, we were trained each year from people on the staff who had taken a course offered by Cornell University, and it had to do with de-escalating a volatile event. That was the main part of it, was de-escalating the event. And if there was to be a physical restraint, we were trained on how to do that. I could tell you that every single time I was restrained, that is absolutely not what I was taught on my psych rotation in nursing school. You guys did the opposite. You guys didn't de-escalate. You only escalated, right? So the person asked, describe what training that you received as best you can. Jen says, sure. It was, first of all, there would be more than one person there. And so it was never advised that there be a solo restraint. If the person was becoming violent, then there were a few things that one could do to de-escalate the violence. If you couldn't talk the person out of it, then physically what you would do is two people would approach the person, and by lifting them up from their armpits, you could immobilize the person and bring them to the ground and then roll over them so that you could get them to calm down. I am not doing it justice. What you're not doing is talking about how any restraint I've ever seen actually went. That's what you're not doing. It had to do with whether or not the person had come from behind and had a chokehold on you, or from in front and you had a chokehold on you, and what you were going to do in those scenarios. Was there any paperwork you received in connection with that training? And he says, yes, there was a test that you had to take. There was both a written test and a physical test. Did you do that on an annual basis? He says, yes. Who at FFS administered the course? He says, my recollection, it was a man named Jim Rogers. I think he's passed away. Do you know what his credentials were? Well, he was trained. He had gone to Cornell University to get the training there. Do you have paperwork from that? No. Did Jim Rogers also administer the test? Yes. Any other forms of physical restraint? Were there any other forms of physical restraint used at FFS while you were there? Jan says that was what was prescribed on what the staff was supposed to do. Did the course cover wrapping a resident in a blanket? No, that had been dropped for a long time ago. That's not true, Jan, because you were a teacher while I was there, and you were there while I was wrapped in a blanket with duct tape. So that's weird, right? That's strange. Was students punished by reducing the portion of meals they received? In the earlier part of the school, yes. And then at some point, I can't remember just when, that was no longer used. Was it used in 2013? He said, I don't believe so. Was students ever required to eat extra portions of their meals as punishment? Once again, what do we got? Not in our family, not that I can recall, no. Are you aware of that happening in any other family? Jan says, it is possible, but I don't remember that. Have fun. Love you. Was students ever shadowed? Yes. Papa. Papa. What are you doing? Sorry. What does that mean? It means that another person was with them all the time. Would that include a student being watched while they were in the shower? The person would be standing outside the shower. Would it include observing a student while they were on the toilet? The toilets were fairly open, so that is my recollection anyway, so it could. Do you see the pattern here? To your sense of this, would that be something that could humiliate a resident being watched in the shower or toilet? Could a student, to your sense, could a student be humiliated by being watched in the shower? And Jan says, yes. I think that was an idea that had already been in place before I started there full time, and it was not something that I was necessarily quick to use. Interesting. Under what circumstances could a student also be humiliated by being watched in the toilet? What was the purpose of shadowing punishment? Jan says, well, I would not necessarily see it as a punishment. The idea, that's bullshit, right? The idea was that you needed to have somebody with you, and that was the shadow's job, was to be a person you could talk to. So just so everybody's clear, the student that committed suicide from jumping from the building, he was on double shadow, right? He had two shadows, and it still didn't stop him. Just so we're clear. In your experience, did a student want to talk to somebody while they were using the toilet? And he says, as I said, it was not something that I was a part of. This that I was quick to use, so I don't offer an answer on that. And he said, did you ever use it? Not that I recall. I put students on shadow, but I don't know that I would say that you had to watch them while they were on the toilet. How about in the shower? He says, or in the shower. Are you aware of any purpose other than humiliation to watch a student while they were in the shower or using the toilet. And he says, I can't hazard an answer to that. Weird. It's weird, right? They ask again, can you think of any reason other than humiliation that a student would be watched while they were using the shower? Jan says, I was not in favor of humiliating students, so I will answer it that way. I didn't use that as a technique or a requirement. So what other families did along those lines, you'd have to ask them. First and foremost, if you put somebody on shadow, it is very well known that that person is on shadow and they are to be watched 24/7. So he knows damn well what happens when somebody's on shadow, right? The same question with respect to observing a student or shadowing a student while using the toilet. Can you think of any reason other than humiliation that that technique would be used? And Jen says, I give the same answer. Hi, Crazy Chrissy. Was the shadowing technique ever used in connection with concerns about eating disorders? Now, this is a weird answer, right? Because Jan says, I didn't deal with eating disorders. It was not part of there were other people who were more versed in that. It was not something that it was not an area that I delved into, but he was a family leader, right? Therefore, he would have had students in his family that was under his charge that would have had eating disorders. Eating disorders were very common at the family school. For an assortment of different reasons, right? So that's a crock of shit. Did you ever have students who had eating disorders? And he says, yes, there were students there who had eating disorders. Were there students in your family that had eating disorders? And he says, yes. How did you deal with that? I didn't. It was the female or counselor who oversees that. As I said, I take the victim's name out, right? Do you have any recollection from this point forward is just how disgusting the staff was to this victim who did try to report the sexual assault that she was experiencing, right? Do you have any recollection of blank at a table topic event? And he says, I don't doubt that she had a table topic. I just don't recall it. I will probe a little bit to see if this jogs your memory. Do you recall an FFS faculty member who told plaintiff and other members of a table topic event that she was a sex addict? He said, I don't recall that. You don't recall either way, is that correct? And he said, yes, I just don't recall somebody saying that. Again, I just want to, when attorneys do these kinds of deposition, they get a clear answer whether your recollection, is that didn't occur or you don't know one way or the other. Do you understand the distinction I'm making? He said, yes, I guess I would say I don't recall, and I would add one way or another. Do you recall an individual named Curtis Newsom? Yes, he was a counselor there for a time. Do you know if he was the victim's counselor? And Jan says, I believe I was told he was. Did you ever interact with Curtis Newsom regarding the victim? Jan says, no, I don't recall ever talking to him about her. Are you aware that there came a point in 2013 where blank reported Curtis Newsom was engaging in sexual acts with her? He says, I was told after. Sorry, hold on. Charlie said, I was told that much after the fact. Approximately when were you told that? He says, my belief is that I was told that after I left this school. Well, come on, Jan. Oof, this is embarrassing for you, right? Did blank victim ever express to you that she did not want to go to counseling session with Curtis Newsom? Jan says, it is possible that she did. Let me clarify. My attitude about counselors and about students going to see counselors long before blank had gotten there, I was never a proponent of students going to see the counselors and taking time out of the family or out of my classroom, whether it was going to see the counselor or the two doctors, right? So in my response to that question is I would never have been in favor of her going to see a counselor if she didn't want to go. But I was already told by administration that there was not anything I could do about it. Let me clarify that. It didn't have to do with blank, who is the victim, okay? It had to do with the fact that what the counselors wanted, trumped what family leaders wanted, okay? Do you recall the victim ever telling you she did not want to go to a counseling session with Curtis Newsome? And he says, I don't recall that. Okay. If the victim was called to a counseling session in the evening by Curtis Newsome, would that be within FFS protocol? He says that I don't know. I was not there. Number one, I was not there in the evenings. Number two, I don't know what the hours were that the counselors kept. So I would think that my answer is I couldn't say that could be a part of an accepted practice or not, right? If the victim had objected to going to see Curtis Newsome, would you have asked her why she didn't want to go to see Curtis Newsome? And Jan says, I might have asked her why, but I don't recall her ever telling me that she didn't want to go. And again, I would have to go back to the fact that my representation to administration was always that I don't want to have these interruptions. And if she was going there in the evenings, I wouldn't have been there anyway. See that? Would it have been a violation of protocol for the victim to go to a counseling session with Curtis Newsome in the evening? He says, I don't know the answer. Are you familiar with Curtis Newsome having a special session or special program where students were allowed to listen to hip hop music? Jan says, I was told that. We were strictly prohibited to listening to music, right? Did you respond to that when you learned that that was going on? He says, I objected with administration. Who in the administration did you object to? He says, Rita. And what did Rita say in response? So first of all, hey, Merb. It doesn't say that he told Rita about the essay. I just wanted to be clear. It says that he objected to the playing of the hip hop music to Rita. Okay. So he says that he reported it to somebody that was deceased. You were wrong, right? And this is why I say over and over that you are not the one to talk about this situation, right? What did Rita say in response? First of all, just so we have a little bit of a background, Rita is the Argyrosa's daughter, right? She is Emmanuel, otherwise known as Mike's sister, right? There are people that say that Rita wanted to take the family school apart from the inside out, right? Rita is primarily the reason that the family school became the family school because she was a troubled teen, right? Rita said that he was using this as a creative and therapeutic way, and basically she didn't see a problem with it and thought it was a great idea. Approximately when was that you had that interaction with Rita? He says, I'm going to guess. I don't know. Maybe April of 2013, but that is a guess. I don't know for sure. Okay. To your knowledge, did Curtis Newsome hold himself as an ordained minister? Jan says, well, now that you say that, I think I did hear that. That is not something that I think he did, only because you just said it. I do remember that. Are you aware that Curtis Newsome conducted religious services for the students on a weekly basis? That he did what? Blah, blah, blah. I know that he had some kind of sessions on a weekly basis, but I didn't know that it was religious until you just said that. Were you aware whether Newsome was a family leader in a different family? And Jan says, I didn't think so, but it is possible, not that I recall. Did you ever learn whether Curtis Newsome had a criminal history prior to his employment at FFS? Interesting, huh? Jan says, I heard that after the fact, after I left the school. He's asked, who did you hear that from? And he says, I can't recall. Do you know if the school was aware of that? He says that I don't know. Are you aware that whether Curtis Newsome suspended any FFS rules during his group therapy? Jan says, I don't know. So they probe him a little bit. Do you know if Curtis Newsome permitted students to use curse words during his session? So we weren't allowed to curse. Maybe that's why my mouth is so bad these days. So that's that. Were there any limitations on the use of curse words? And Jan says, no, it was part of the history at the school where people did not swear. Okay. Were students at FFS allowed to chew gum? Jan says, I think there was a time when they began to be allowed to chew gum. I was not allowed to chew gum. That's just me in 96 and 97. Do you recall when that was? And he said, no, I don't. It was later. It was certainly later in my stay there. Was students allowed to talk about sex? Jan says, talk about what? About sex other than in table topic event where they're allowed to have general conversations about sex. The answer is no, right? But Jan, right? Jan says it depended on the nature of that. If you mean, for example, were they allowed to two boys start talking about a young lady in a sexual way? No. They ask other than that, were there any other limitations on students' permission to talk about sex? Jen says, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Well, you just described one limitation, that they couldn't talk about another student in a sexual manner. He says, right. Other than that, could you think of any other limitations on their freedom to talk about sex? We were not able to talk about sex. We were allowed to be degraded over sexual acts, molestations, any kind of sexual assaults that any of us had. We were certainly degraded on that level using those, right? Jan says, I think the idea would be if you were having a difficulty in a sexual area, then you could talk about a person of the same sex and talk about the challenges you're having and what to do about it. Were there any limitations on the student's freedom to talk about drugs? Jan says, again, it would be in the context of the AA experience, would be like, this is what it was like, this is what happened, and this is what it's like now. Glorifying drugs and going back and recounting stories about the times that I got stoned and drunk simply for the sake of glorifying it, that would not be accepted. Talking about it in terms of this is what it was like, this happened, and this is what it's like now would be a more desired approach. Are you familiar with the term war stories? Jen says yes. It is just what I said, going back and you're going to recount the days of getting high, glorifying it, saying wasn't that wonderful, with no movement towards any kinds of reconciliation of past behavior. Were there any kinds of closed circuit cameras at FFS? Jen says there were. Where were they located? There was one or two rooms that were quiet rooms for people who were extremely violent, and the cameras were set up in there. Extremely violent, huh? Other than those one or two rooms, were there cameras anywhere else? Jen says, I'm thinking there might have been outside cameras. There were not cameras in our family. So there were not cameras in my classroom, so that would be my sense of it. There probably were other cameras, just probably outdoor cameras. Now, can you describe the quiet room that you mentioned? It was a place where a person who was extremely violent would be placed until they calmed down, and there would be a kind of staging of behavior where the door would be open and people could come in and talk to the person until they were ready to join whatever family they were in. I didn't have that luxury. We didn't have a padded room. We just had like a room with a cement floor, right? Was there any special carpeting in the room? Originally, no, and then I think they put carpeting in. Do you remember approximately when that was? Jan says, I'm going to say somewhere around 2007 or something like that, but that's a wild guess. I don't remember. Here's a good one. Were the students restricted to certain foods while they were in the quiet room? Yes. Jan says they could be, only because if the students were really violent, they were going to throw the food around anyway. Is that your justification? Weird. What was the food they were restricted to when they were so restricted? Jan says, I couldn't recall. Were they restricted to dry tuna? The answer is yes. Just yes would have sufficed. To what? Dry tuna. Does that refresh your recollection? Yeah, that was an approach that was done away with pretty much by the time I had joined full-time. What year was that? 2000. Did you ever send a student to the quiet room? Jen says yes. How long was the student in the quiet room? It depended on the student, but I didn't want to keep them very long. I wanted them back into the family. Could it be days that they were in the quiet room? It could be. Could it be as much as a week? It could be. It wasn't with students that I'm thinking of one student in particular, and she was only there for a day or two. Wow. Could it be more than a week that a student was in a quiet room? Jan says, not for somebody who was in our family. Again, not for somebody in your, listen, all families use the same policies and procedures. Okay. So this is very strange. All right. Our family did not use the quiet room often because it was an extreme sense of somebody who was violent. To your knowledge, was the quiet room ever used for students other than violence? And he says, not that I recall. That's a lie. Are you aware that Curtis Newsome engaging in sexual relations with, and I am not asking you about blank at the moment, but are you aware of Curtis Newsome engaging in sexual relationships with students other than the victim? He says no. Are you aware of Curtis Newsome taking students to locations where he could not be seen by staff members, faculty, or family leaders? He said, no, I'm going to assume that after I had left and learned about what was going on, that's a possibility, but that was it. It's an assumption. So the answer is no, but I don't doubt that he did. Interesting. Did anybody at the FFS, to your knowledge, have any indication that Curtis Newsome was engaging in sexual relationships with FFS residents? Jan says, while I was at the school, no, I heard about it afterwards. What did you hear about afterwards? That blank had talked to people about it. Could you be more specific? Okay. Merb. Here we are again. Okay. I was told that the victim had talked to Dawn and Rita about it. Now, if you go back to the beginning of this deposition, Dawn Pazamato and Jan Charipko were the leaders of the family, right? And if they had a problem, they would have gone to administration, somebody above them who would have been Rita or Mike, right? That she had talked to them about it while it was occurring after it was reported or something else. Strange, right? Jan says, I think it was a while it was occurring, but I'm giving you secondhand information. Don't start. Take it somewhere else. They asked, did you hear of any other circumstances that anyone at FFS other than yourself knew or should have known about Curtis Newsome engaging in sexual relations with students? Objection to form. Weird. Jan says, I will break the answer into two questions because you asked two. One is, did I know of anybody who knew? No. And secondly, did I know of anyone who should have known? No, I can't answer that. How would I know who should have known? Okay. What protocols were in place to prevent Curtis Newsome from engaging in sexual relations with residents? Okay. Jan says, I didn't catch the first part, so I'll skip. I couldn't say what protocols should have been. I think I represented to you already the fact that I was not happy with the fact that counselors were taking students out of my class and out of the family. So what the protocols of the school could have known, I don't know. So they ask him, am I correct that you didn't have the discretion to say no, a student is not leaving the classroom because the counselor called for the student and the student had to go? Jan says the student had to go, and I would represent my displeasure with the counselor and the administration. So, hi, Black Dove. I hope that you're feeling better. All right. So you got to understand the way that the school was structured, right? It would have been family leaders would be like the first stop, right? And then they would have to go to somebody else. Counselors were always above those, right? So if the counselor said that a student had to go, the student had to go, right? Do you ever recall ever doing that with respect to Curtis Newsome, expressing displeasure either to Mr. Newsome or to the administration? Jan says, I never said anything to Mr. Newsome. I may have said something to administration. What did administration say? He says, well, I say I may have. The answer would have been simply counselors come first, and there was no whatever I'm sorry. Believe me, I made the representation several times. The answer was always the same, and I didn't tire from making the representation, but I always knew what the answer was going to be. Were you still on staff when Curtis Newsome left employment of FFS? And he said, no, I wasn't. You left before he did? Correct. Do you know why he left? I was told afterwards. What were you told? I was told that he was fired for inappropriate sexual behavior. Were you told who he was alleged to have engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with. Jan says, that's a good question. I don't recall whether I was told, but at some point I learned it was the victim. But I don't know just that but it was certainly after I had left the school. When you learned of that, did you think about what you knew of the victim's interactions with Curtis Newsome? He says, I didn't have much contact with the victim. So I guess I'm thinking about all of this since this has come up. I certainly have gone over in my mind what I remember and what I don't. I think that I would say this, that after learning about what was going on, my sense of Mr. Newsome I didn't particularly like the guy. What could I say? Really? Why do you all say that? Right? So they ask him, when you learned that Curtis Newsome had been fired or had left the school because of inappropriate sexual relations with victim, in reviewing in your minds Curtis Newsome, were there any red flags that you said, well, yes, that was a little suspicious, or anything along those lines? He says, no. Again, I would simply say that I have said several times, it is counselors called students down to their office, so that was part of standard operating procedure at the school. Why did you not like Curtis Newsome? He says, he just seems a little too wonderful. The information about why Curtis Newsome left the school, was that communicated to you as a fact or something else? He said it was a conversation. I don't recall with whom, but it was a conversation. Did anybody tell you about the events after victim reported the inappropriate sexual conduct by Curtis Newsome? He said, no, I think I covered that. I'll probe. Okay. Did you ever learn that Dawn Pazamato and Rita Argyros imposed a house blackout on the victim? He said, no, that was not. I don't recall that I knew that. Did you ever learn that Rita Argyros or Dawn Pazamato tried to convince the victim not to report to the police what had happened? He says, I was told that after the fact, after I left the school. Do you remember who told you that? No, I don't. Are you aware that the victim became a subject of a table topic after she reported the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsome? He said again, I was told that later after I left the school. Do you remember who told you that? No, I don't. Did you ever become aware that residents at FFS were assembled and told that a student had accused Curtis Newsome of sexually assaulting her, but also told that group that FFS did not believe the student? Did you ever hear of that? He said, I heard that after I left. And again, who told you that? He said, no. Hi, Princess Sarah. Was it an unusual practice for the staff or leaders at FFS to state that a student was not believed? He said, it was, yes. That would have been in that form. I think it would have been unusual. Would it be a violation of FFS protocols to state that a student was not believed? Jan says, I think there would be. Again, there is a long history of students who come to the school who are used to lying about things. And I don't wish to impugn your client. That is not why I said what I just said. Rather, that the idea that students would be lying would be part of the history of the school. So they asked for clarification, right? I want to make sure I'm understanding. Would it be a violation of protocol to say at a table topic that a student should not be believed? Jan says, again, as I just said, statistically, the student would be up at the table, would have a history of lying. So it would not be a violation of protocol to say we don't believe you. I want to get real specific at this moment about the victim, right? Would it be a violation of protocol for FFS staff, administrator, or family leader to say that the student who was reporting a sexual misconduct by a counselor should not be believed? Jan says, I couldn't. You're asking me to comment on something that I was not privy to. So as to protocol, I think I have answered that. There would have been a history of students who didn't tell the truth, so that is what I would say. I want to get real specific now on the same topic. Would you have ever told the residents at a table topic that the victim was not to be believed if she had reported that her counselor had engaged in inappropriate sexual misconduct with her? Jan says, I mean, that is hypothetical. The answer is no. I don't think that I would. I think that I would be talking to her. Again, I wouldn't be involved because that is a female issue. So I think that I would defer it. This is why, this is what I am pretty sure I would do. I would have gone to Rita and said, this is what occurred. What we are talking about is telling the table topic participants that the victim is not to be believed when she is reporting sexual misconduct by her counselor. That is what you would have reported to Rita. He said, if it came up in a table topic, I would have reported it to Rita. Would you have made the correction at the table topic? He said, I don't know. That is hypothetical. Hypotheticals aren't allowed. It is okay to say you don't know, but if the reason you don't know is because it is a hypothetical, if you can try to answer that, it would be appreciated. Jan says, you're giving me a scenario that I can't answer the question. Were you aware? This is going to make me sick. Were you aware that after she reported the sexual misconduct by her counselor, that she was forced to remove her shoes and sit and stand in the corner of any room she entered, including meal times? Were you aware of that? Jan says, no, I am not. Were you aware that the victim's meal portions were reduced after she reported the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsom? Jan says, no, I wasn't aware of that. I was not in the family, so my dealings with the victim at that point were non-existent. You were not in that family at that point? He says, no, I was in a different family. I know that I was in a different family when this was occurring. So they ask him, if you were still at FFS, then there is a chance you were aware of this, right? He says, I was still there, but I wasn't aware of it. I call bullshit. Were you aware that the victim was prohibited from using condiments or sugar at meals? He says, I was not aware of that. And again, after she reported Curtis Newsom's sexual abuse, were you aware that she was prohibited from drinking tea? I was not aware of that. Again, after she reported, were you aware that she reported the sexual abuse by Newsom, that she was prohibited from using makeup or wearing her hair loose? He says, I was not aware of that. Were you aware that after she reported the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsom, that she was required to wear baggy, shapeless clothes? Again, I did not know that. I was unaware of that. Were you aware that after she reported the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsom, she was required by FFS to perform manual labor? He says, I was not aware of that. Were you aware that after she reported the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsom, that she was put on house blackout? Again, not aware of that. Were you aware that these sanctions were in place until she left FFS? He says, not aware of that. In your capacity of a family leader, would these sanctions be an appropriate use of discipline in response to the victim reporting the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsom? He says, it wasn't a scenario that I was involved with, so I can't make speculation as to whether or not it was the right thing or not. I don't know how else to answer that. So they probe. Would these sanctions that I just described be something that you would consider an appropriate response to the victim reporting of the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsom? And he says, my gut feeling tells me that I would have reacted differently. Would it be a violation of FFS protocols to sanction the victim in the way that I just described in response to her reporting of a sexual abuse by her counselor? So anybody that I know of that tried to disclose a sexual assault in the family school, they were treated the same way. The sanctions were just piled on. It's not the first and only time, right? Jan says, I think that the protocol that was in place and it wasn't written down that I could recall would have been what Rita's reaction to this was, that the student was lying, and everything that had occurred after that regarding the sanctions was predicated on that conclusion. So the conclusion, I can't, questionable or inappropriate. You say questionable, and now I am probing whether it was more than just questionable, whether it was actually inappropriate. Jen says, based on the fact that the allegation was correct and true, it would have been inappropriate. Do you think that such let me clarify, based on the fact that she may have been lying, then the sanctions might have been appropriate. But what if she wasn't? Right? Would it be inappropriate to put those sanctions in place without investigating the truth of what the victim was reporting? Jan says, I would think that investigation would have been required. Without an investigation, would you agree that it was wrong to punish the victim? Are you aware that ultimately the investigation concluded that, in fact, Curtis Newsome had engaged in sexual misconduct against the victim? Susan Runge was my counselor. She was like the head of counseling. I guess not at this point in time. Now you see that they have his notes, right? They're questioning him, but they have his emails. So there's that. So he says he didn't know that there was an investigation. And number two, I was told that he had indeed done that. It's crazy. Who told you that? I don't recall. And I think that, let me just try to clarify this. My relationship with the school was I had left the school, and so I was getting tidbits of information about a variety of students, and this was one of them. I may have covered this, but I just want to make sure I don't miss it. Do you have any recollection of the victim asking you to allow her to not go see Curtis Newsome? He says, I don't recall that. You don't recall either way that she asked me? So this is where we get into the email thread, right? I don't recall that she did. I will say this. I won't rule it out, right? Because now he's smart enough to realize, holy shit. I won't rule it out. But again, I go back to the fact that I had no say in whether or not students had to go to the counselor. I was told they had to. Was students allowed to write emails? He says, I don't think so. It could have been that it evolved towards the end of my tenure, but I don't recall. Have you read the complaint that the plaintiff filed in this case? And he says, I have read it. When was the last time you read it? On Tuesday. Have you spoken to anyone other than your attorney about the contents of that complaint? He said, no. Well, I spoke with my wife and I spoke with a friend of mine who is a retired attorney, not necessarily about the contents, but rather what to expect in today's deposition. Has it gone the way he told you it would? Pretty much. Anyone else? Did you speak with anyone else about the contents of the complaint of the case? He said, no, I did not. Mr. Chiripko, did you ever hear about... Why are you barking? For what? Come on. Papa. Charlie. Come on. Did you ever hear about allegations of sexual misconduct by employees at FFS other than Curtis Newsome? Jan says, I had heard of others. Can you tell me what the other allegations are about? These were all before I got to the school to work full time. And two of the people, I'm good, the dogs just bark. And two of the people were fired. One of them is under investigation. I think we all know who that one under investigation was, right? I want to unpack this a little bit. If I heard you correctly, you're aware of allegations against 3 different individuals at FFS. Is that correct? That is correct. What are those 3 individuals' names? One of them is Ken Rivers, one was Sal Guarino, and one of them was Paul Gear. Then you said 2 people were fired and one is still under investigation. Is that correct? That is correct. Who was fired? Sal and Ken. That is what I was told. Let me clarify. This is what I was told. I don't know what the details of that was. Who told you that? Administration. What were you told about when the Ken Rivers, the allegation of the acts occurred? That he had sexual relationships with a student there. When is it alleged that those relations occurred? It was before 2000, so back in the 1990s. Was an investigation performed in connection with the Ken Rivers allegation? He said, no, not that I know of. Interesting. The Sal Guarino allegation, when is it alleged that occurred? Before 2000. Do you know if there was an investigation? I don't believe there was. Do you know who Ken Rivers alleged to have abused? No. He just says he doesn't know. Paul Gear, that investigation is currently open. Is that correct? No. He said that is correct. I was a witness in an FBI investigation that I am not at liberty to talk about. So there's a lot of this redacted because it's an open investigation. I am asking you what you know. Hold on. So in that context, can you tell me what you knew about when those allegations were alleged to have occurred? Hold on a second. He says that he's unable to talk, but they did the FBI. But there is a lot of this that I'm coming up to a part that's heavily redacted. If you have the FBI agent's number, that we take a break and you call the FBI agent and ask them if you're allowed to comment, right? Your attorney can tell you this, but what I anticipate is that I will go to the court, ask about what you're allowed to talk about, and bring that back. And we already have one question that is true that is scheduled to talk to the judge about. Say there's a lot of this redacted. I am more than happy to consider this confidential, and we will come back. Who is the student that you're referencing? There's multiple students, right? It's the Paul investigation, right? And it's weird to me if you know, Jimmy was as involved. Why don't we have a deposition on file for you, Jimmy? You indicated that in addition to those 3 incidents, that there was another incident at that the FBI is aware of. Did that involve Paul Gear or someone else? Interesting. Interesting, right? It's a lot of this is all redacted, so bear with me. So it seems, Merb, that you have it all twisted up, right? Was the other incident? There are boys. More than one boy. Yeah, there's multiple students. There's multiple closed cases. There's multiple open cases. There's open cases that haven't been settled yet. There's cases that have been settled yet. The Paul Gear, his trial is expected to start on July 22nd, I believe. But because the defense appealed his detention, right, they think it's going to be pushed back. But in terms of changing that protocol, okay. So what, if anything, did FFS do in terms of changing their protocol or training or anything along those lines when they learned of the incident in the 1990s involving Paul Gear? He said you'd have to ask someone in administration. You don't know what, if anything. They did nothing. That's what. They did nothing. Are you aware of any other allegations against Paul Gear other than what you've already described to us? No. Who in the administration did you speak to about Paul Gear? And he says probably Rita. They all knew. They all knew. So he's saying probably Rita, right? Because Rita would have been like his superior, or Mike, right? But they all knew. They all knew. Do you know if anyone made a mandatory report regarding the Paul Gear allegation that you were originally aware of that he told you about? He said, I don't know of any. So nobody reported. Nobody. All those mandated reporters and not a single one did a goddamn thing about it. Do you know if any FFS ever went to any police authorities in connection with the Paul Gear incident that you were aware of that he told you about? He said, I don't know of any. Do you know of any conversation with Rita or anybody else at FFS about doing a mandatory report? He said, no, I wasn't working at the school full time. So there's there's multiple in the 90s was like that's the majority of the Paul victims were in the 90s, right? So that would have been when he wasn't he wasn't a full-time employee. Oh, money was absolutely involved, right? Because you got to understand that the chorus, right, was one of their, it was one of the things that they used as the propaganda to draw parents in, right? Because they needed these parents to believe that it was just a college prep school, right, Merb? Right? That chorus was led, taught, trained by Paul Gear. So they swept Paul Gear's crimes under the rug because that is what parents needed to see for them to be making the money they had, right? Did you have any conversation with anyone at FFS, Rita, or anyone else about reporting this to police authorities? He said no. Did you know if the parents of these students were ever told about the incident? I don't believe they were. The answer is no, right? What made you say that you didn't believe they were? He said, I never heard anything about a follow-up. When you told the administration at FFS that Paul Gear should be fired, what was their response? What did I just say? Paul was a gifted choir director and teacher, and his work with students and getting them to perform was something that they valued. Right? That's why. Did they tell you that to say that they preferred not to fire him? Jan says it was implied. Do you recall any other aspect of your conversation with the administration at FFS regarding the Paul Gear confession of sexual misconduct? And he said no. Did FFS rely on Paul Gear's reputation to enhance their own reputation? Jan says, as I said, he had the ability to take kids. So, shut up. Enough. It's Robbie. As I said, he had. Why are you barking at him? Had the ability to take kids who had never sung before in their lives and get them to perform at a very high level. Is Paul Gear, after Paul Gear was fired from FFS, where did he go? I don't know that he was fired. He wasn't. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I thought you said that after the incident, he reported it to the administration, that you had a conversation with the administration that he should be fired. Did I get all that? That is correct, but he was not fired, right? Does he continue to work at FFS? He said yes. Let me just it's redacted. I'll just go back over that territory just to make sure I'm clear. After Paul, I'm imagining, right? I can't see through the redaction, right? But I'm imagining it says that Paul confessed to Jan. Jan tried to go to administration. And after they told the administration, Jan told the administration they should fire him. Papa! They did not fire him and continued to work there, to your knowledge, until the school closed. And Jan says correct. Do you know, if there were any disciplinary actions taken against Paul? The answer to that is no. Plain and simple. Other than moving Paul's bedroom. So, okay. I posted a while back a short just to give context of the property that the family was on. I label Paul's house, right? When I got to the family, it was a female dorm underneath, right? They moved females out of there and put males under. And I know of 2 other victims that were male after he was moved. Other than moving Paul's bedroom, were there any other precautions taken, to your knowledge, by FFS to protect students from sexual abuse by employees at FFS? He said no, not that I know of. After that one conversation that you described where you told the administration they should fire Paul, did you ever have another conversation with anybody in the administration regarding Paul and his continued employment? He said no. It was only one conversation? Correct. To your knowledge, after this incident, did Paul and his wife live in the same house with the door separating the residents from the dorm? Yes. You say his bedroom was moved. Did he still have access to the residence in the evening at night? The answer to that is also yes. Did you ever see a report by Dr. Vogel regarding the victim? Did I ever see a report regarding her? I don't think so, but it's possible. Did Dr. Vogel ever talk to you about the victim? Again, it's possible. There were a lot of students that I was talking with him about. Did you ever tell Dr. Vogel that victim was sexualized in her behavior with males? Not that I recall. Did you ever tell Dr. Vogel that the victim had pronounced codependency? Not that I recall. Did you ever tell Dr. Vogel that the victim had a history of being mistreated by males? Not that I recall. Did you ever tell Dr. Vogel that the victim had succumbed to the pathological influence of a male staff member and become involved with him sexually? He says no. Did you ever have a conversation with Dr. Vogel where you blamed the victim for the sexual abuse by Curtis Newsome? He says no. Did you ever have a conversation with anyone where you blamed the victim for the sexual abuse by? He said no, because I wouldn't have known about it. Did you ever tell Dr. Vogel that the victim's behavior with males were clearly compulsive? He said, not that I recall. Now, we'll get into that, right? Did you ever tell Dr. Vogel that after the report of the abuse by Curtis Newsome that the victim continued to act out with males? He said, no, I didn't learn about that until after I left the school, so I had more conversations with Dr. Vogel. Now, I want to look at 2 exhibits that have been exchanged. I will share my screen, mark them. I've labeled them in the name of the document. Let me pull them up. They were emails, okay? This is a compilation of documents, but in some of which are emails from you, some of which you may not be aware of, and I will just ask you some question. We'll go page by page. Exhibit 1 of today's date, and there are Bates numbers at the bottom of each page. We have 25 pages. We will go through some of them quickly, and some we might spend a little bit of time on. Ready? Exhibit 1. Bates stamp, blah, blah, blah. A lot of these are emails. Jeff Brain was the director of operations at the school. There's a lot. I know Paul Gears. I'm hoping that the feds are able to charge him with more victims. I know of at least 5 that are outside of the lawsuits and stuff like that. Just students that have disclosed to me personally after Paul was charged. I do know that there were a couple of them giving statements to the FBI, but because of the statute of limitations, I'm unsure if they're able to be added to the case. That's a really gray area, and I don't know. This is a document, blah, blah, blah. It is an email from Jeff Brain. He was a counselor. He actually just lost his job. He did move to a new school, but sucks. Actually director of, I guess what you would call it. It would be outreach, kind of. I think he had that title. Is this a document that you recognize as an email that you received in 2013? Jan says, well, I see that my name is on it, but I don't remember it. Of course you don't, right? Is it a document that you would have received in the course of your employment with FFS? He said, again, I see my name is on top of it, so I probably received it. Did you keep any of the emails as a matter of course that you received in the course of your employment? No. When would you delete them? He said, well, I think the answer to that question is the computer that I had at the time has since died, and I don't have those emails. Imagine that. Okay. I am looking at the email Thursday, January 10th, 2013 at 9:52 p.m. Do you agree that this is an email you were copied on? He said, yes. Your name is on it. Yes. Is this an email that you would have received in the course of your employment? He says, I would have since my name is on it. Brenda Hamilton, I don't know who that is. He is a counselor, right? Shit. He's asking the names of people, staff members, a nurse, right? hold on. Just staff members that were all CC'd on the email, right? Another email dated February 2nd, 2013 that you're copied. You would have received this in your course. So I noticed in the second paragraph, it says she is on shadow. Do you see that? So they go over what shadow means. Mary was a nurse. Another email. Hold on. Because, okay, hold on a second. So there's a reference to a gender blackout. In the last paragraph, it says, if they are not on gender blackout or on a personal, then it was a normal energy. What does that mean? If they're not on a gender blackout or personal? He says, you'd have to ask Mike. But what that basically means is that two of them should not be talking to people from the opposite sex, or personal blackout would be these two people are on blackout with each other, right? But what they're doing is they're establishing that there was staff talking about students, right? I sped through it because I didn't black out the victim's name in one of them. But essentially what they're doing is they're pulling emails, and in these emails there's correspondence between different, staff members, nurses, counselors, all about, a student, right? That's essentially what they're doing. There's a few names I want to go through. Ann Lewis, Joe Petriella was another fucking piece of shit. But you see, these are all staff members, right? He's asking staff members, counselors, right? Why are so many people on this email? He says they must have had different relations to one or two of the students, or it had to do with the possible thought of runaway plans. I'm speculating. It's crazy. Hold on a second. So the bottom email from Curtis Newsom, dated June 16, 2013. You're on that email, as is Paul Gear. Is this an email that you got in the course of your employment? And he says, I'd have to assume, since my name is on it. Do you recognize what this document is? He says, I don't think I've seen it before. This is you are on the email at the bottom of this page. Yes. June 7th, 2023. Did you receive this in the course of your employment? Correct. There is reference to a family counselor in this incident. Would that be Curtis Newsom? I don't know. Who was Amy? I don't know. Do you know anything, Jan? Let's go to the page to see if Amy is blacked out. I'm not sure why. How about Amy Parent? Do you know? Oh, it's a parent. So they CC'd a parent, right? He was a science teacher. This is the document you received. Hold on a second. So parents are probably CC'd in emails when you're discussing the child, right? They're just going over. Mary was a counselor. She was not a nurse. Hold on a sec. Let me just do this real quick. Right. He's a goddamn liar. Hold on a second. I clearly missed. Hold on. I'm going to remove this real quick so I could fix it, and I'll be right back with it. But they bring up emails, right, where the victim is mentioned. Hold on. Let me just go through it. Hold on. Hold on. I'm doing this real fast. I'm sorry. I thought I got them all. And I just my own personal, I prefer not to show her name. Hold on. I'm going to make sure that it's out. Hold on. Your phone is going crazy. Okay, hold on. There's a couple here, so just give me a minute. I'm going as fast as I can. I agree. It's really unfortunate, right? Because they try to drill all of these things in our minds, right? And from where I'm sitting, we're the ones that display those values, right? Because they wanted us to, truth, accountability, integrity, and I think that they don't display those characteristics to me, and it's unfortunate. It really is, because I just look at them all like they're fucking crazy now. All right, I think I got them all. Hold on. Let me go back. Because they start pressing about, I'm sorry. They start pressing about, hold on, about the victim, right? Hold on. I just want to make sure I got it all. Okay. Now I have to go back to stream. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. All right. So what was going on with the victim on February 2nd, 2013? He said, read her paragraph to me. If you can read it and then tell me if this refreshes your recollection about any of the incidents that were going on at the time. And then it says, this is the email, right? Hi, Jan. I don't disagree. You don't have to read it out loud. Thank God, right? Because that would have taken some editing. And then I want to ask you a question. Take a moment. Can you read the next email? Is your response, right? For clarification, Mary's email is in response to Jan, is in response because Jan is before Mary. Where it says on personal, no verbal or eye contact. You see that? Jan says yes. Was that something that you ordered for the victim? Now, remember, earlier, he said that he didn't really do that, right? Probably Dawn and I together, but certainly I was a part of it. Seems that way. This personal blackout meant that not only could people not talk to her, that they could not look at her. Is that correct? And he said, no, this one had to do with a particular boy. So she could not. It was only that one boy. That is what personal means. So personal blackout just means that you are on blackout with that person. Do you remember this incident? He said, no, I don't remember it. I see what I wrote, but I don't remember the incident. No. Is there anything in this email that you would say is not accurate? And he says, no. Well, that's weird because you just said you didn't remember, right? Strange. Presumably, your job is to write clear and accurate emails to the best of your ability, correct? He says, correct. This continues. There is an email. So the email below, Mary Burkhardt to Dr. Manley, and you're copied on it, correct? He said, correct. Do you know why this is described as a crisis report? Strange. He said, I can't read the writing. The type is so faint, I'm struggling reading it. She had passed a note to a boy. Can you go to the page prior? He said, right. She passed a note to a boy, and she had been making out with a boy earlier in the year, right? He says, right. Is this crisis? Is that why you're saying crisis? They said, because in the subject line, it says crisis report. He says, I think that there are other things that were coming up that had to do with self-harm. Weird, right? Because he said he didn't remember any table topics involving that student, right? Strange. There is a reference to a best notes. Do you know what that is? It's at the bottom, first paragraph, last email. He said, I don't know. Best notes was a particular platform that you could use to post things. I don't think I've ever used it. Weird. You received this in the course of your employment. He says, yes. So this is from you to Jeff Brain, who was the director of operations, Curtis Newsom, who was the sexual assaulter, right? Joe Petriello was a staff member there. I hated his guts. Vogel was the doctor. He says, so you referenced the conversation you had with Dan and Anna. Who is Dan and who is Anna? He said, I'm thinking. I think that parents of the person, of the young man in question. There is a reference here that you said that you are leaving in June. Correct. He said, did you leave in June? I said so earlier. I retired at the end of June. I don't know who Dave L is. Hold on. So it says that you had a very good talk with D censoring blank his stay here, what he wants to do for himself. Do you recall anything about the circumstances of this conversation or this email? He said no. So this is from you to Vogel. Vogel was a psychiatrist. Lies. To your knowledge, was this an occasion where this student, identified as D, was being, or I guess David, for lack of a better word, was thrown out of FSS. He said he was being exited for some reason. You received this in the course of your employment, correct? Yes. Do you know why he was being exited? I don't recall. So strange how this works, huh? So weird. So he has another email, right? This is from Curtis Newsom, and you're copied on it. He says, okay, what is a junior sponsor? Junior sponsors were students who were senior students who were helping other students. What is a buddy? A buddy is just what it says. Someone who is assigned to help somebody out, usually somebody new, right? We will put on buddy in the beginning. It is very similar to the junior sponsor, but it was just for an initial period. Yes, it's facts. This is from Cindy Argyros. Who is that? That is Mike's wife, and she was a family leader, also part of administration. You're copied on this, so you received this during the course of your employment, correct? Yes. So weird. Isn't it weird how that works? I'm just skipping through the things. I'm telling you, Florida. I'm telling you, it's like they all have the same syndrome. You know what I mean? Are you aware that there was a handbook for the FFS? He said, correct. I'm aware of it. Did the handbook get updated on any basis? Was it an annual update or anything like that? He says, I don't know. You'd have to talk to administration. Did you ever review a handbook? Jan says, early on, I had reviewed the material. This particular one, I don't recall reviewing it. So embarrassing. It's not every page, but do you recognize this? Okay, portion of the handbook. He says yes. Did you ever make any referrals for the victim? Jan says, I'm not sure what you mean. Did you ever send her to a psychologist or psychiatrist, a medical doctor, a counselor, or anything else? No. Can you tell me about any conversations that you had with the victim? I don't recall any. Right. Perfect. Right. My crazy life. Did you ever have, and I am just probing, did you ever have a conversation with Dr. Manley about the victim? Not that I recall. No. Did you ever have a conversation with Emmanuel Argyros about the victim? He says, well, since we had an email back and forth, I probably did, but I couldn't recall what they would have been. You don't remember the content? He says, no. Dr. Vogel, do you recall any of your conversations with Dr. Vogel about the victim? No. Do you recall any of your conversations with Dawn Pazamato regarding the victim? Now, remember, Dawn Pazamato was his family partner, right? I don't recall them, no. Do you recall any conversations with Curtis Newsom, who is the abuser, regarding the victim? No. Did you ever talk to law enforcement about the victim? No. Was there ever a decision to move the victim to another facility? Not that I am aware of. You would have to talk to administration about that. Are you aware of any of the reasons why FFS closed? Yes, bottom line was the student population had decreased where they could not keep the facility open. You're fucking welcome, right? Why was the student population decreasing? I think there was a lot of negativity generated by some of the students. Some? How about all? Can you tell me what you mean by negativity? There was a thing called the Truth Group or something like that. It's basically an online place where people can vent what their feelings were about the school. How did you become aware of this online place where people can vent about their feelings about the school? Somebody told me about it. Did you ever go and see anything once? What did you see when you went there? He said, I didn't scroll down. I just looked at the opening page, and it was basically people who were unhappy with their time at the school and were voicing their opinion about it. He said, when was it? This was in February, before he passed. When was it that you looked at that? He said, oh gosh, 10 years probably. Did you ever hear of something called a family school truth campaign? He said that is what it was, I believe. The answer is, I don't know what that organization is, but I think it's associated with that. When you looked at that, did you have an opinion about whether any of the accusations you read were accurate? Jan says, I only glanced at it. So the answer is my opinion was that a lot of the people, a lot of the students who posted on there still had a lot of problems. Imagine? Can you imagine? We had a lot of problems. Not that y'all was supposed to help us and only poured more problems onto us. It can't be that, right? That can't be it. I want to try to pin down the time frame of your conversation with Paul Gear about his molestation of the boys. He says, okay, so what is your best recollection of when that conversation took place sometime in the late 1990s? And you never reported any of that? You never did any of that? So was the school built when you had that conversation? Jan says yes. Was the tunnel built when you had that conversation? So the tunnel, some people call it the tunnel. He said, no, I don't believe so. It was in between the construction of the school and the tunnel. And he said, yes. Do you remember where the conversation took place? And he says it was right at the front office of the school building. Was anyone else present during that conversation? He said, not privy to the conversation. There were people that were around, but nobody was overhearing our conversation. Did you take any notes in connection with that conversation? He said, oh, no. Would you say that this was approximately the spring of 98? Jan says, I don't know. It could be. Is that fair? He said, it could have been. So the new school was built in, it was almost done when I left in 97. I think that this is just a different lawyer taking over. Oh, interesting. Not there. He definitely was not there full time. Interesting, right? Dr. Manley. I saw a psychiatrist once, I think, in the 18 months when I was there. This is not necessarily anything. Here it is again. Who was your direct supervisor at the school? It would have been Rita. That's correct, Merb. Rita would have been his direct supervisor. Like what? What you're talking, you mentioned he said he told Rita. That's what he would have had to do. It's crazy to me how she better not. She better not. Hold on. I see, it's crazy to me. I want to know where all of those things went, right? All like the crisis reports. I want the videotapes. We all had like a black binder. I want to know where all that shit is, right? I've never seen a doctor say like, they also pulled students off of psychotropic medications. Let's say students were on Adderall for ADHD, they were pulled, right? Crushed, like not tapered, just taken off. Yeah, it's unfortunate, right? I'm trying to see if anything. See, that's it. I think the rest is just the table. And he died, right? So now what? Now what? Right? It is dangerous, but they didn't give a shit, right? Why did they care? We were just it's super unfortunate how they just run amok, right? Like they legitimately, it's like we were cattle, right? And instead of like, I could understand if like they were marketing themselves as like this, great place, but they were doing that while causing direct harm, right? That's what's so fucking crazy about it, is that like they had all of these people, and even in the deposition, he's talking about how the quiet room, or like the restraint room, was used for kids that were extremely violent. That's not true, right? It was meant to break kids that weren't complying to their bullshit, right? And I think that, like, people, I know that it's really hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around the fact that that places like this exist, right? And we didn't. It's sick, like reading the part where they say we're all liars and all this crazy shit, right? Like, when I was watching Hammer's podcast yesterday, right? And I forget what the student specifically said, but and I said in the chat, like, we were always told we were liars. Like, it's only very recently that the tide has turned where people believe what we're saying, and nothing's changed, right? We have been saying the same things since we got away from that place. But it for so long they would point their fingers and say, oh, we're just disgruntled students, right? Because we had a bad experience. That narrative didn't change until maybe the First Times article, which was 2018, right? So, like, you can't tell me, Merb, I'm talking to you. You can't tell me that you just did not know about the abuse, because it has been everywhere. A simple Google search, right? That's quite literally what shut the school down, was the fact that the age of the internet was coming up and parents had access to our stories being told. You can't say that you didn't know. You can't say that that man didn't come home from work and tell you about some of the fucked up shit he witnessed. I'm not going to believe that. You're going to tell me he worked there for 12 fucking years and didn't say a goddamn thing? Wasn't he there when the kid committed suicide? You wouldn't have come home to talk about the fact. Did he tell you that that kid was begging for psychiatric help for days? And instead of taking him to a place that he could get the appropriate care that he needed, they put him on double shadow. And they thought that that would just cure it. That kid is dead. Right? You want everybody to stop dead in their tracks when it comes to your son that passed away, right? There are 135 sets of parents with kids that are dead because they could not deal with the trauma that was inflicted on them from that school. And you think that you're the one that should be talking about this, because you're not. You're not, okay? You live with somebody that had their hands in abusing children. We were children. So yeah, was I there when he was there? No. Did I have to be? No, because as you just heard in Jan's deposition, policies and procedures didn't change like that, right? Because, well, Jan was saying it's just always been that way since the school's inception, right? They abused children. It is not your place to discuss anything regarding the school, because for the 2 fucking years that you were asked about it, you denied abuse. Fiercely denied abuse. It took me 1 day of opening my mouth before your husband was in my DMs admitting to abuse. It is not your place. Leave it to the students to tell their stories. It is not your place. And I have not found a single student that wants you to cover this. We are talking to producers. This is going to be much bigger than you can even imagine, okay? Because it is our job to tell our stories, not yours. You had a chance 2 fucking years ago when you were asked about the school, right? And you denied it. You denied it, and you continued to deny it, right? We don't need you, an abuser's wife, to tell our stories. We can do that just fine, right? Newspaper articles, reporters, we could do it just fine. You are not the one that should be saying anything. Nothing. Right, and I don't believe that he did any kind of SA, but you're not going to discount the other types of abuse that went on there. You're not going to do that. You're not going to do that, because I can promise you that that will turn out very bad for you. Every student that I have spoken to regarding this, and I'm an admin in that Facebook group, by the way, right? Anytime your husband's name comes up, there are multiple students in the comments saying, nah, fuck that dude. He did this to me, right? And you don't understand the dynamic of the school, right? Because you weren't there. Staff played favorites. There are going to be students that he was nice to, but that does not and will not ever on my watch discount the students that he was not nice to, the students that he was verbally abusive to, the students that he was physically abusive to, right? If anything, their stories matter more. Why? Because 13 fucking years is a long time to work at a school, be a mandated reporter, and see all kinds of abuse going on around you and not picking up the fucking phone to call CPS. Right. And yeah, it's not going to happen on my watch. That's for damn sure. And I promise you, things could be very easy, right? They could be very easy. Speaking about this school, you better go ask somebody about what I'm capable of. Honestly. Because I will wreak havoc. Because this is a personal thing. I've wreaked havoc on people that were not personal. Okay? That's first of all. Second of all, I'll just let you know that 2 of the people that I've been involved in calling out are both under federal investigation for multiple different crimes, some of them including scamming, Merb. Okay? I am very good at what I do. And my simple request, leave the school off your platform. That's it. I don't give a shit what you cover, what else, but this topic should stay off your platform. You could try me if you want to, but I promise you, you will not like the result. Okay? You will not like the results. You had your chance to tell the truth about the school when you were first asked about it, right? Because I can assure you, Merb, the things that I've seen, none of them look good for you. And all it takes is somebody to put the fucking pieces together and report them to all kinds of 3-letter agencies. Okay? I'm smart. I'm thorough. Right? I pay attention to detail. So good luck. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. I don't give a shit what you got going on everywhere else. I really don't care, right? But just from an outsider, I hope those legal funds are going to where they're supposed to go. You know what I'm saying? Because that's not good. I'm pretty tenacious, right, Black Stuff? You've been with me for a while. I'm pretty tenacious. And you know what you know what, Merp? Hey, how about this? I contacted the public relations department of every single ad that I found on Miss Ashley Cat's channel and had her blacklisted from ads. Try me if you want to, okay? Try me if you want to. But if you can't make ad revenue, what happens to your channel? I advise you to leave the Family Foundation School off your platform, Merb. I don't give a shit what you do about any. I've seen some of the things that you've done, and you are no better than any of the people that you try to talk about. I've seen more class, more care, more intelligence from the people that you say are your hate group. Isn't that crazy? The things that I've seen from you, Merb, they don't look good, right? So what you don't want, what I can absolutely assure you that you do not want, is to get me to start paying more attention, right? Because if I do that, you will be fucked. That I can promise you. Right? See, I don't think that you knew where I came from when you blocked me, right? And then you tried to say you didn't block me like I'm stupid. I am no rookie when it comes to this. I am no rookie when it comes to hate communities, because I'm actually a member of several of hate communities, right? You don't want me to start paying attention and going through your shit with a fine-tooth comb, right? So if I were you, I would just leave it off your platform. Leave it to the story, leave it the stories to tell by the victims, right? Because that's who should be telling it, not somebody that profited off our abuse. You know what I mean? Call me crazy. Call me crazy, right? But an abuser and their wife should not be discussing this in any way. And I got this for you, Merb, just so you know. I would tell any staff member and their wife the same things. But you know what? You know what's weird? You know what's weird? No other staff have said a fucking thing. Why are you the only person that is attempting to cover it? They've all been silent since Paul got arrested. Strange. That's strange, isn't it? So, Florida Great Lady, I understand, right? I've dealt with Miss Sassy Cat. I've dealt with Jessica Kent hate communities, right? And I'm respected in those communities for a fucking reason, right? It's because I'm not just gonna sit here and make videos. I'm gonna do work behind the scenes, right? I'm gonna do things that are gonna matter in removing somebody's platform, right? Izzy White, he's another one. 2 million followers on TikTok. So you could try me if you want to, Merb, but I promise you, maybe you should do a little bit of research on me, find out what I've done, what I had my hands in, right? Before you talk about the school. Oh, he's such trash, dude. He's such trash. I'm sorry, but he has been on a roll the past few days. And I laugh, right? Because I know who's watching him, right? Because they talk to us, right? And it's so funny. And I can't wait for him to be arrested and it become front page news on TikTok, because it's coming. It's coming, right? And like I'm not asking anything crazy from you, right, Merb? I'm asking you one thing. Leave this topic off of your platform in any way, shape, or form. That's the only thing I ask, right? Yeah, it's over for her. It's over for her. I could tell. It didn't take me very long to see what was going on here, right? And she didn't count on that. She didn't count on the fact that I understand, like, I know this sounds crazy, but like, I understand the psychology of, and I'm using air quotes, but you can't see me, hate groups, right? I understand that the hate community forms because some type of creator has been doing multiple different things and never answered for or taken accountability. Because people like Merb, you'd be amazed what a simple "I'm sorry and I'll do better" can do, right? It didn't take me very long to see what was actually going on. You know what I'm saying? It didn't take me long at all. Stacey, for a great lady, it's so hard to get somebody removed from, because there is like First Amendment rights, right? Like, we're Americans and we have rights. That's why with Miss Dashy Cat, I went for the money, right? And I would Google, I took a list, or I made a video on TikTok asking for who saw what ad, right? And I found the public relations department or the media relations department, and I personally emailed them. I had conference calls with very big corporations. And then what happens is, on their side, like on the business end, they can add a channel to their blacklist, right? So once that's done and you start getting a bunch of different companies to put your channel, YouTube notices that, right? And I'm sorry, but like Merb, with a channel your size, you should have brand deals. You know what I mean? You should be doing more with your channel. You don't ask yourself why. It's because you're problematic. It's okay to be problematic. Own that shit. I'm problematic. But you're never going to see me say I'm not, right? Because I know that I'm problematic. I know that I'm going to come across some shit on the internet and I'm not going to be able to keep my goddamn mouth shut, right? But I can admit that, right? I'm also not out here trying to, I don't know. I saw something, I think Held to the No posted about a woman, like one of her supporters. I don't know the whole story, so I don't want to like misspeak, but it was one of her supporters that ordered something, and then like she doxed her or like smeared her and like her cop husband. It's amazing that like that's the level she goes to be a victim. It's really unfortunate, right? I'm always amazed at like the lack of self-awareness that I see on social media. And I know I see this all the time, but like I never knew that so many people were not self-aware. Like I never knew that that was a thing. I never knew that was like that there were people that were not aware of like their behavior and their actions, and it's crazy. I hope that money's going to her legal funds. You know what I mean? Because that would be, theft by deception. Just so it know for, I know, and that's what always blows my mind, Ivy. Um, is the amount of people that I see in her position, right? That all they had to do was take like accountability and just answer for what they've done, right? I'm always amazed. Jessica Kent is a prime example of that, right? Huge platform, had it made, couldn't admit to a fucking relapse, and all the proof keeps coming out, right? But she can't admit to it. She's her own self-destruction, right? It amazes me that they can't see that the reason why the hate, in air quotes, continues is because they are not doing something they should be doing, right? I am a firm believer in, if you have a platform, right, you have a responsibility to not just be who you say you are, but more, right, that too, right? And that's what I'm saying. Black Dove, perfect, right? A simple video that said, I acknowledge that I did this. It was wrong. I apologize for saying that I was this, and this, and I've been everything, but the support would be crazy. Like Ashley, right? I used to tell Ashley all the time, if you admitted to being an active addict and tried to do better, half your hate would stop, right? It's crazy to me how people in that position just can't see that all they have to do is answer. Do you know how many mistakes I've made with my platform? I fuck up all the fucking time, right? But like, I own it when I do. And that's why people stay with me, because they see me make mistakes. They see me answer for the mistake and move on. It's crazy to me. Oh, wow. That's crazy. Right. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I saw all that. You know what I mean? And it can't, listen, it gets to a point where it can't be anyone else. I used to say that about Ashley, about Miss Ashy Cat Sarah. I used to be like, I have never seen anything like it. Right. Then I came across other people that did the same thing. And I just can't believe, like, they don't see it, because she has to know. She sees her analytics, right? And Merb, you're not going to win that case. It's really bad. I don't know what you're doing, honestly. I really don't know what you're doing, but that case, uh, it's crazy to me. It's crazy to me. Yeah, and you know what? All it takes is, like, I don't know. But you know what I mean? It would serve you better, Merb, to not discuss the Family Foundation School, its students, or anything else on your platform. And that's all I'm gonna say, right? You want to find out how much I did notice that you're peeping my TikTok though, Merb. Don't worry, Merb. I wouldn't post you much on TikTok because you don't have much of a following there, right? I want people to see when I post it. Yeah, oh, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, but here's the thing, Irene, right? If one person says something to me, I really probably wouldn't pay attention to it, especially because so many people talk shit about me anyway. But like, if two people that like know me say something to me, it's something I pay attention to, right? It's if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a fucking duck, Merv. And you got so many people telling you, you know, and like, it's got, I think, was it your live, Florida Gray? I think I was watching the replay of, and I fell asleep watching it, I don't know, the other night. And I was thinking, I thought to myself, my God, it must suck for Merv to watch hundreds of people in your lives when she doesn't have a quarter of that. And half of them are hate watches. They're telling you something, Carolyn. You know what I mean? They're telling you something. And you should have probably listened a long time ago, because I do believe that there's a point of no return, right? And I'm not just talking about her, I'm talking about like other people in my experience of like being involved with people that are involved in like accountability. Um, there is a point of no return, right? I do believe that she passed that point, right? And it's unfortunate, all because you couldn't apologize. You know, that's sad. To lose it all for your own actions is wild. And all because a simple apology, right? Fuck. Just apologize. It's so much easier to do that. Instead, you'll watch it all burn to the ground. Truly crazy to me. All right, y'all. I hope everybody has a good night. Black Dove, I do hope that you are feeling better. If you want to DM me on TikTok. I don't know what J Bells is. Um I really haven't been keeping up with her stuff. Sometimes it pops up like when I go to bed. Sometimes if it's on like my home screen when I open YouTube, I'll just listen to something until I fall asleep. But that's what I'm saying. She don't want me to start paying attention, right? Because I'm pretty good at what I do. And it wouldn't be a good thing for her because I see a lot going on there. You know what I mean? And that's without me even paying attention. Imagine if I really paid attention. Um, I hope everybody has a good night. I got a new job and it's been killing me. I hope everybody has a good 4th. If you are American, stay safe. Don't drink and drive, right? Um, don't do anything that I wouldn't do, which is not much these days. But I hope everybody has a good night. Hi, Fighty Cat. And I will see y'all soon. It'll be up so that you could watch the replay because yeah, I don't even know what it is. Like, there's so much that I don't even know. That's what I'm saying. She don't want me to really start paying attention because I'll fucking tear it all apart. Have a good night, guys. No, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. We, the victims, appreciate it.